The gymnasium at Fort Bragg has gone completely silent. General Patricia Hayes, 4 stars, Commanding General of United States Army Forces Command, the highest-ranking officer on the installation, has stopped reading from her prepared remarks. She is no longer looking at the podium. She is looking at a man in the third row. An old man in a gray suit, spine perfectly erect, hands folded on his knees, the way a man sits who was taught a long time ago that posture is a form of respect for the room. Hayes steps back from the microphone. She descends the stage stairs without using the railing. The room does not breathe. And when she stops directly in front of him, she says, in a voice that carries to every corner of that gymnasium, "I should have done this years ago." The man in the gray suit does not flinch,
Does not look away.
he simply nods once, the way a man nods when he has waited a long time for something and has long since made peace with the waiting. I am sitting 4 rows behind him. I am a former Army medic, a caterer, a man who paid for a stranger's breakfast 7 months ago because it seemed like the right thing to do. And I have been wondering ever since how one small act could lead me here, to this gymnasium, to this moment, to a story I did not know I needed to tell until it was already unfolding around me. Let me go back to the beginning. My father came to the United States from Lagos in 1981 with a degree he couldn't use and a military background nobody asked about. He had served 6 years in the Nigerian army before immigrating, not because he was forced to, but because, as he told me once on a long drive I still remember in its color and temperature, he believed that service was the most honest thing a person could offer the world. He pressed his uniform before he wore it. He polished his shoes whether or not anyone would see them that day. He believed that standards did not exist for audiences. They existed for the person maintaining them. That I enlisted in the United States Army at 19, partly because of him, and partly because I didn't yet know what else I was. I served 6 years as a combat medic, separated at the rank of Specialist E5, and came home to North Carolina with a skill set that translated cleanly into catering, because keeping people fed and keeping people alive have more in common than most people think. I have been running Okafor's catering for 11 years. I drive to Tilly's Diner on Highway 87 most mornings before my prep shifts begin. It is a small place, a converted ranch building with booths upholstered in green vinyl, a griddle seasoned by 40 years of steady use, and a quality of early light through the east-facing windows at 7 a.m. that makes the whole room look like something worth preserving. It was a Thursday in early November when I first saw him. He was seated in the last booth on the right, the one nearest the window, working through a plate of biscuits and gravy with deliberate, unhurried care. He was old, mid-70s, I judged, with white hair cropped close and a posture that was unmistakably military, even under civilian clothes. An expression of complete, self-contained calm that I recognized the way you recognize a language you learned before you learned to read. He wore a veteran's cap with faded Army embroidery, 82nd Airborne, and a brown wool jacket worn at the elbows. When Denise, the morning waitress, brought his check, he reached into his breast pocket and produced a card with the unhurried confidence of a man who has paid for his own meals for 50 years without incident. She ran it. She came back. I watched her lean in and keep her voice beneath the ambient noise of the diner. The old man's hand went still on the table. He took the card back slowly, looked at it for a moment in the way a person regards an object that has just misbehaved without warning, then placed it in his pocket, folded his hands, and turned to face the window. His jaw did not tighten. His expression did not change. He simply made a private internal adjustment, the kind that cost something, and let the moment pass without a sound. That I had seen that form of composure before. In the field. In people trained not to leak distress into the room around them, because the room could not afford it. It is a discipline acquired in high-pressure environments, and it does not switch off when the environment changes. That I told Denise, quietly, to add his check to mine. I finished my coffee. I stood. When I passed his booth on my way to the door, something fell. A coin hit the tile floor and spun in the narrowing spiral coins due before landing flat. I reached for it automatically. It was a military challenge coin, the kind issued to mark unit membership or to acknowledge a specific act of service. I had received 2 during my time. This one was different, heavier, gold-toned and genuinely aged, with the particular dull shine of metal that has been handled for years. On one face, An eagle, wings spread, clutching an olive branch and arrows. Around the edge, text I would need better light to read. On the reverse, for stars arranged in a square, and beneath them, a set of initials I could not immediately place. The old man had not noticed the coin fall. He was already pulling on his jacket. "Sir," I said. He looked up. His eyes were a very pale blue, the kind of pale that develops after decades of outdoor light. "You dropped this." He took the coin from my hand without examining it. He examined me instead. "What's your name, son?" "Daniel Okafor, former Army medic." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, more like recognition. The way a thing slots into its correct position. "Harold Whitfield," he said. He shook my hand with the grip of a man who had done it 10,000 times and whose muscle memory had lost nothing. "Thank you for your service. And for the breakfast." He walked out before I could respond. I stood there holding a receipt with Denise's handwriting on it. Whitfield, covered by Booth 4. I carried his name home in my head all day. That evening, unable to fully account for the restlessness I felt, I sat at my kitchen table and typed it into a search engine. The results loaded in 4 seconds. I spent the next 2 hours reading. The name Harold Whitfield returned results I was not prepared for. Not because they were dramatic in presentation. The internet is never short of drama, but because they were specific, measured, and completely at odds with the man in the worn wool jacket I had just watched absorb a declined card with the composure of someone for whom small indignities were simply not worth the expenditure of visible emotion. There were photographs. A younger man with the same pale blue eyes beneath the brim of a dress uniform hat. A name attached to operations I recognized from my own service training, logistical and humanitarian deployments in the Gulf, in the Balkans, in the opening years of Iraq. References to a former command position at 18 Airborne Corps. A mention, without accompanying detail, of a Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest combat decoration awarded by the United States Army, given for extraordinary heroism under fire, with a citation that remained partially classified. I closed the laptop and sat with that for a while. Then I called a man I had not spoken to in 3 years. Retired Sergeant First Class Dominic Reyes, formerly of the 82nd Airborne Division, a man I had served alongside during my second deployment and who had spent the decades since becoming a careful, reliable source of the kind of institutional Army history that does not appear in official press materials. "Whitfield," Dominic said, when I gave him the name, not a question. A recognition. "You know him?" I said.
"I know of him," Dominic said.
He was being careful about how he said it. "Where did you come across him?" I told him about the diner. The declined card. The coin. A pause. "Daniel," he said, "describe what was on that coin. Specifically." I described it.
The eagle.
The 4 stars. The initials on the reverse. Another pause, longer this time. "Those aren't unit initials," he said. "That is a personal command coin. A 4-star general officer's personal command coin. You understand the distinction?" I did. "His son has power of attorney," Dominic said then, lowering his voice slightly. "Word moved through certain circles about a year ago. People tried to reach out and were redirected. Medical advisory. That's what the son told anyone who called. Medical advisory. The calls were being handled through an attorney's office." "What does medical advisory mean in practice?" I said. "It means," Dominic said slowly, "that someone made a determination that the general was no longer fit to manage his own affairs, and that the people who would ordinarily look in on a man of his standing were told, politely, to look elsewhere." I said nothing for a moment. "Who do I talk to?" I asked. Dominic gave me a name. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Reeves. Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Reeves, United States Army, retired, formerly of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, currently serving as a Veterans Advocacy Coordinator at the North Carolina Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. She had handled, Dominic said, several documented cases of improper financial guardianship involving retired senior officers, and she understood both the legal architecture and the institutional culture better than most attorneys practicing privately. She agreed to a call the following Tuesday. Her voice was direct and unhurried, with the quality of someone who has spent a career turning complicated human situations into legally legible ones. I told her everything. The diner, the coin, the search results. What Dominic had relayed about the power of attorney and the coordinated deflection of the general's former colleagues. When I finished, she said, "What you are describing is a pattern with a specific name. Elder financial isolation. It occurs more frequently than the public understands, and it is disproportionately common among retired high-ranking officers because their financial profiles are complex. Their primary social networks are institutional rather than neighborhood-based, and they've spent entire careers being trained not to request assistance." "Is what was done to him legal?" I asked. "The mechanism itself can be executed legally," she said. "Whether proper protocol was followed in this case is a different question. What I need to examine is how the conservatorship was established, whether the evidentiary threshold was actually met, or whether someone moved through the procedural requirements quickly and quietly." Before she ended the call, she asked me one more question. "In your interactions with him, was there any indication of cognitive impairment? Any difficulty with recall, with reasoning, with managing a conversation?" I thought about the pale blue eyes, the precise grip, my full name and service history, remembered without any prompting, from a single introduction days earlier. "No," I said. "He was the sharpest person in that diner." She said she would begin pulling the county records. What Lieutenant Colonel Reeves found in the 10 days that followed arrived in an electronic folder with a cover note that read, simply, "This is worse than I expected. Connor Whitfield, the general's son, 49 years old, a financial consultant based in Charlotte, had filed for durable power of attorney over his father's assets 14 months prior. The stated basis: progressive cognitive decline in the period following the death of the general's wife, Martha, 2 years before." The supporting documentation consisted of a single written evaluation from a physician who had seen General Whitfield once, 45 minutes, 6 weeks after Martha's funeral. 6 weeks after the death of a man's wife of 41 years. A period during which, any competent grief specialist will tell you, the behavioral presentation of acute loss in an elderly man is frequently indistinguishable from early cognitive impairment to an untrained observer. The physician was not a geriatric specialist. He was a general practitioner who had seen General Whitfield on 2 occasions in his life. An independent neuropsychological assessment had been requested. No second medical opinion sought. No guardian ad litem, an independent legal advocate appointed by the court to represent a person whose decision-making capacity is under review, had been assigned. The petition had moved through the county family court with what Lieutenant Colonel Reeves described, in her summary, as minimal scrutiny. "He never challenged it," I said, when I reached her by phone.
"No," she said.
"He didn't." "Why?" She was quiet for a beat. "Some men," she said carefully, "particularly men of his generation and background, believe that publicly contesting a family member's authority over them constitutes a form of weakness. They will absorb a significant loss before they will make it visible, before they will make it a matter of record." He never asked to be found. The phrase had been forming itself quietly in my mind since the morning at the diner, and now I understood it differently than I had before. It was not passivity. It was not defeat. It was a form of dignity so deeply structural, so thoroughly integrated into who he was, that it could be mistaken, from the outside, for a man surrendering without resistance. "What do we need to move forward?" I asked. "Someone inside the current institutional framework," she said. "Someone with standing who can formally attest to his cognitive fitness and to the scope of his service record. Because what I have in front of me is a legal filing supported by one 45-minute general practitioner visit. I need a record." She paused. "General Whitfield has one. We need someone to open it." The person Lieutenant Colonel Reeves directed me toward was Brigadier General Marcus Stone. Brigadier General Marcus Stone, United States Army, currently serving as Deputy Commanding General for Sustainment at Fort Bragg, 18 Airborne Corps, who had served as a major under General Whitfield's command during a deployment to Bosnia in the mid-90s, and who had, according to Dominic, made 2 attempts to reach the general over the past year before receiving a letter from Connor's attorney, advising that all contact be routed through legal representation. I drove to Fort Bragg on a cold Wednesday morning, and met Brigadier General Stone in a conference room off the main administrative corridor. He was compact, precise in his movements, with the quality of focused attention that senior officers develop over time, the ability to be fully present in a room without appearing to monitor. He shook my hand before I reached the table. "You're the man who paid for his breakfast." "Yes, sir."
He sat down.
He looked at me for a moment. Then he asked, "How is he?" The directness of it, the uncomplicated human weight of it. It told me in 4 words everything I needed to understand about what kind of leader Harold Whitfield had been. "He's well," I said, "cognitively intact, completely himself. And he has been living for 14 months inside restrictions his son imposed without authorization and that he has not contested." Brigadier General Stone looked at the table. "I tried," he said. "The first call, I was told medical advisory, outside contact restricted. I called again. The third time, I received correspondence from an attorney." He paused. "I should have come in person." "I'd like to correct that now," I said, "if you're willing." He looked at me. "What do you need?" I walked him through what Lieutenant Colonel Reeves was building: the legal challenge to the conservatorship, the evidentiary gap in the original filing, the need for a formal sworn attestation of General Whitfield's standing and fitness from someone with unimpeachable institutional credibility. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the conference table drawer and placed something on the surface between us, a small notebook. Leather-bound, dark green, worn at the spine where it had been held and opened many times. He slid it toward me. "He gave me this 20 years ago," Brigadier General Stone said. "The day I made Major." He said an officer's notebook was the truest record of who they were, not the formal evaluations, not the citations, but what they chose to write down when nobody was grading them. I picked it up carefully. The cover was embossed with an eagle. Inside, the pages were filled with handwriting so deliberate and economical it looked almost typeset: brief field notes, names, unit designations, precise observations about individual soldiers. "Private Teresa Malone, first in her family to serve. Watch her carefully. She has something." And further along, in a different ink, what appeared to be a post-operation note: "The convoy reroute cost us 6 additional hours. It cost nothing else. Decision stands." And one entry from a period I recognized from my own service training, dated and logged without elaboration: 11 men came home today who would not have if we had held the original plan.
"No one will write about this."
"That is acceptable." There home did I set the notebook down. The room was very quiet. "He never asked to be found," I said. Brigadier General Stone looked at me steadily across the table.
"No," he said.
"He never did." Lieutenant Colonel Reeves filed the formal legal petition to vacate the conservatorship in Hoke County Family Court over the following 3 weeks. Brigadier General Stone submitted a sworn declaration attesting to General Whitfield's cognitive fitness and professional record. 2 additional retired officers, whose names I will omit from this account at their request, provided supporting statements. A court-appointed neuropsychologist met with General Whitfield for 6 hours across 3 separate sessions and returned a written evaluation describing his cognitive profile as, and I am quoting the precise language used, "exceptional across all measure domains, with performance metrics consistent with a highly educated professional approximately 20 years younger." The evaluation concluded with a single, unembellished sentence: "There is no clinical basis for any determination of impaired decision-making capacity in this individual." I visited General Whitfield twice during this period. We met at a park near his apartment building. He had moved there after selling the family house following Martha's death, an act that Connor had cited in the original conservatorship petition as evidence of impaired judgment, though the sale had been completed at full market value and the proceeds carefully structured. He brought coffee in a thermos each time. He asked about my catering business with the specificity of a man who had retained and cataloged everything I had mentioned on a previous visit. He asked about my father after I had referred to him once in passing. "He came here from Lagos," the general said the second time we met. 6 years in the Nigerian army before he immigrated. And he pressed his uniform whether or not anyone would see him in it. I had told him this once, weeks earlier. "Yes, sir," I said. He nodded. He turned the paper coffee cup slowly in his hands. "That is what the work looks like," he said. "Not the decoration on the shelf. The pressed uniform. Every morning, whether anyone sees it or not." I thought about that for a long time on the drive home. About a man who had spent 4 decades pressing his uniform in the pre-dawn dark of installations on 4 continents, making decisions in rooms that the public record would never name, writing down the names of soldiers he would carry in memory long after the institutional files had moved on to the next roster. And about how a person shaped by all of that could find himself in a diner on a state highway with a declined card and a son who had decided, 14 months prior, that the man's long, habitual silence was evidence of diminishment rather than of exactly who he had always been. He never asked to be found. But some things need to be said aloud regardless. The hearing was a Friday morning in late February. I will not narrate its procedural sequence. That is not where this story lives. What I will tell you is that by the time the Honorable Raymond Collier, presiding judge of the Hope County Family Court for 14 years, had finished reviewing the full submission package in front of him, the courtroom had gone quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when an outcome that cannot be reversed is approaching. Connor Whitfield sat across the aisle from his father with 2 attorneys flanking him and the expression of a man who had been fully confident 2 months ago and was now comprehending, in increments, the dimensions of what he had constructed. Judge Collier asked General Whitfield 3 questions. The general answered each one the way he answered everything, directly, without economy of precision, in the manner of a man trained in environments where an imprecise answer had consequences. After the third answer, the judge set down his pen. He looked at the file for a long moment. "The conservatorship is vacated," he said. "Effective immediately. All accounts, all property rights, all financial autonomy are restored to General Whitfield. Without condition and without restriction." He looked at Connor once, then back at the general. "Sir," he said, "I regret that this proceeding was not initiated sooner. But that is not the moment I want you to hold. 2 weeks after the ruling, Brigadier General Stone arranged, through official institutional channels, for General Whitfield to be formally invited to the annual 18 Airborne Corps Veterans Recognition Ceremony at Fort Bragg, an event the general had attended without fail for a decade following his retirement and had been absent from for 2 consecutive years while Connor managed his calendar alongside his finances. He asked me to drive him. I wore my best clothes. He wore the gray suit, pressed with precision I could see from across the parking lot. We did not talk much on the drive north. The February morning was cold and very bright, the kind of winter light that does its job without pretending to be warm. The gymnasium was full when we arrived. Veterans in rows. Active duty personnel positioned along the walls. On the stage, at the podium bearing the Army Eagle, stood General Patricia Hayes, 4 stars, Commanding General of United States Army Forces Command, one of the highest-ranking Army officers currently serving anywhere in the country. We found seats in the 3rd row. I sat 2 rows behind. General Hayes began her remarks at 9 a.m. measured. Authoritative. The formal register of a senior officer who has delivered remarks like these many times and has never confused the occasion with a performance. She was 4 minutes in when she stopped. She looked up from the podium. She looked at the 3rd row. She looked at him. The room registered the change without understanding it yet. I watched her face. She was not uncertain. She had known he was here. Someone had made certain of it. She stepped away from the microphone. She came down from the stage. The room stopped breathing. She walked the length of the center aisle and stopped directly in front of General Harold Whitfield. She came to full attention. Her right hand rose, slowly and precisely, to her temple, full salute. Held 0.5 seconds. Tend, General Whitfield rose from his chair. He was 76 years old. The motion was not quick. It was completely unhurried and completely steady. He returned the salute with the exact, practiced precision of a man who has performed this gesture thousands of times and has never once treated it as routine. When his hand came down, General Hayes said, in a voice that reached every person in that gymnasium, that I have replayed in my memory many times since and expect to replay for the rest of my life. 40 years of service, sir. The Army does not forget. A pause. Then, And neither do the men and women who served under your command and came home because of decisions you made quietly in rooms most of us will never enter without asking a single person to take note. Somewhere behind me, a sound. I turned slightly. Connor Whitfield had been seated near the rear of the gymnasium by a staff aide. He was on his feet. He didn't know what to do with his hands. His face carried an expression I have seen before, in the field in the immediate aftermath of a decision whose full consequences have just become visible, the expression of a man who has just understood something that can only be understood once that way. General Hayes had not looked at Connor. She did not need to. She held her gaze on the man in front of her. "Thank you for your service, General Whitfield," she said. "It is an honor I should have delivered to your face a long time ago." I did not arrange the conversation that followed. Connor found me in the parking lot after the ceremony, hands deep in his coat pockets, and asked without preamble if I had a few minutes. I said yes. We sat in my car with the engine running for warmth. He did not speak immediately. The pines along the installation perimeter stood gray-trunked and spare in the winter light. "I didn't know about the operation," he said. "About the men who came home because of his decisions." He never said a word about any of it. Not once in my entire life. "No," I said. He wouldn't have. Connor looked at his hands. "After my mother died, he changed. He became very still. He sold the house. He started moving large sums of money to organizations I had never heard of, amounts that looked, from where I was standing, like someone who had stopped caring about consequences." He paused. I thought I was preventing something. I thought I was protecting him from himself. "Did you ask him about the organizations?" He looked out the window.
No.
The words sat in the car between us. "They are scholarship funds," I said, "for the children of soldiers killed in operations he commanded. He has been quietly funding them for 15 years. Before Martha died. Before any of this. He has been doing it the entire time." Connor was still for a long moment. Outside, 2 soldiers walked past the car in the direction of the main building, their boots loud on the pavement, a table finding the first tenuous footing on new terrain. It was adequate. He said that I had learned enough about him by then to understand exactly what that meant, and I think about Thursday mornings differently now than I used to. There are hundreds of thousands of them available in an American life if you are fortunate. Most of them move through us without residue. Coffee, a familiar counter, the ordinary interior warmth of a place you go because it is easy and near. We are present in them without actually arriving. I know this because I had been going to Tilly's Diner for 3 years before the November morning I watched an old man in a brown wool jacket absorb a small public humiliation with the stillness of a person who had been absorbing large private ones for decades. And for the first time in those 3 years, I stopped moving long enough to actually see what was in front of me. He never asked to be found. I have turned that phrase over many times trying to understand it precisely. Not as a description of secrecy or self-pity. Once it has been practiced long enough to stop being practice and become simply who a person is. Men and women who have given the most irreplaceable things they have, their judgment, their time, the unrepeatable years of their lives, in rooms no public record will document, in operations the country was never shown, for outcomes that arrived quietly in the form of people who came home to their families. These people do not keep a ledger. They do not require the account to be publicly acknowledged. They wake up the next morning and press their uniform and return to the work that we have constructed a particular idea of legacy. We imagine it as visible, as structural, as something that accumulates above the surface where it can be photographed and cited and placed on a plaque in a building with a name attached. General Harold Whitfield's legacy is not located in any building. It is located in a green leather notebook filled with handwriting so deliberate it looks almost typeset, the names of soldiers he watched and remembered and kept track of because he believed the individual person was always the actual point of the work. It is located in a scholarship fund that has been quietly paying for the educations of the children of fallen soldiers for 15 years without a single press release. It is located in 11 men who came home from a revised convoy route and who have no idea and will never need to know, whose decision made that possible. That is what legacy actually looks like. Not the salute in the gymnasium, though that moment was true and necessary and deserved, and I will carry it with me. The 15 years of unannounced payments. the notebook given to a major on the day of his promotion, the pressed uniform, every morning, whether or not anyone is there to see it. The worth of a man is not diminished by a room that doesn't recognize him. I believe this the way I believe things I was never formally taught, through watching, over time, the people who lived them without teaching them. My father showed me, on an ordinary drive, in plain language. General Whitfield confirmed it in a diner on a state highway by doing nothing more than being completely and precisely who he was in a moment that offered him every possible justification to be something smaller. I paid $8.40 for a stranger's breakfast on a Thursday morning in November because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because he reminded me of someone I loved. I received nothing I expected and everything I needed, a reminder that the people we pass on ordinary mornings are not ordinary, that the measure of a life is not readable at a glance or a swipe or a brief public moment, and that a small act of unremarked decency is sometimes the exact thing required to open a door that the world needed opened.